Now we go. So, with that, I want to welcome you all to Building Community Power, the second and final panel of our 2025 gala. This marks our sixth virtual gala at ASAN. And this approach to gathering has opened up our event to the whole community, allowing for participation from across the country and beyond. Our gala would not be possible without the community that surrounds us. From our grassroots members to our organizational donors, this event is able to take place because of the support we receive from people like you. And to that, I have to say, thank you so much. Your support in buying a ticket goes directly to this cause. If you are interested in continuing to support ASAN and its mission, please consider becoming a member or increasing your membership if possible. We offer a variety of levels with different perks. Memberships can start in as little as $3 a month. And for more information, you can please visit the link in the chat. Now, we want to note before we get started that the views expressed by our guest presenters are their own and not ASAN's. And now we will move us into the panel. So before we begin, I would like to ask all of our panelists to introduce themselves. And I will be going in a rotating order calling on y'all as we move through the journey. Ren, you are to my left. Would you like to begin?
Hello, my name is Ren Coloni, and I use they them pronouns. I am a multiply disabled, chronically ill, autistic person with some access to speech, and I communicate best by typing. But there are benefits to being audible, so I'm using an AAC device today to voice for me. The shape I'm taking on your screens today is that of a smiley, fat, white non-binary person, wrapped in a soft blanket, with glasses and dark hair, half shaved and half in a long braid. I'm speaking to you today from unceded Doeg land, right by the Occoquan River in so-called Virginia, on the east coast of Turtle Island. I
Thank you,
started
Ren.
out with grassroots work as a teenager working with the Transgender Teen Survival Guide, a blog that, at its peak, served something like 70,000 transgender youth and our allies with written resources, advice, and community support. This was in the early days of trans culture being available to young people, and much of what our team put out was just not available anywhere else for our audience, online or in person. We helped trans youth navigate scary and dangerous situations, hosted online community events, gave tips on the safest ways to bind or tuck, demystified gender-affirming healthcare, practiced harm reduction, and saved lives. I wouldn't be able to do the work I do now without having been part of that team. I'm sorry. This is the short introduction and not the long one.
You're totally good. I'm always bad at telling when folks are done talking. All right. Sorry, now my brain's going. AJ, you are next in the alphabet. Would you like to go?
Yeah, hey y'all, I'm AJ Link. I'm a black dude with a green hat on and a green shirt. I guess I'm the DEI panelist as a cisgender male. Love that for the community. Um, I I don't know what else I'm supposed to say, Alex, besides who I am.
There's nothing in particular, however you would like to introduce yourself. Since this is about building community power, if you want to speak to like maybe what really matters for you in that front, or like how you got like your 1 to 2 sentence speech about why that matters for you in particular and how you do that work.
Oh yeah, sure. I think community is incredibly important and solidarity is incredibly important all the time. Solidarity to the Guild of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, Self-Advocate Network, solidarity with workers all the time. I am a former ASAN employee, so I've been doing disability work at ASAN and then before ASAN and after ASAN. I'm autistic. I think it's important to be in solidarity with all members of our community, right? Whether they're disabled, non-disabled, whether they're trans or gender non-conforming or cis, whether they're immigrants, whatever marginalization or oppression that people come to the world in, I think it's so important to be in solidarity with those folks as we try to build a better future. And that's the work that I do, both, my day jobs, when I volunteer, all those different types of things. So yeah, thank you all for having me, and sorry for not being prepared with a better description of who I am.
Absolutely not. You are totally good. Also, I realize I didn't give my own visual descriptor, y'all. Hello, my name's Alex Grenstaff. I am ASAN's program manager. I am a white person with dark brown hair that is cut into a mullet, glasses that have a swooshy thing, and I am wearing a sleeveless teal shirt and probably far more rings than necessary, but it makes me happy in my life. Autumn, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, my name's Autumn Leonard. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns. She, her is mostly just a piece of patriarchy because it happens sometimes. I, yes, a visual description. I am a white, non-binary person, long auburnish hair. I haven't cut it in like 8+ years. I'm wearing tinted kind of dark glasses as well as actually an ASAN shirt that I got for being an ACI participant that I have tie-dyed, which was tie-dyed in the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, so it is a piece of fine art. Yes, I am autistic. I'm also trans and I'm intersex, and it is Intersex Awareness Week, which means I'm going to commandeer y'all's gala for just a second, because a lot of people aren't familiar with what that means. So basically, what intersex means is just biological differences, sort of like you have neurological differences. It's the same thing, just with certain parts of the body, right? So anything from internal, external organs, hormone production, synthesis, chromosomes, all that sort of stuff. Not everyone who's trans is intersex, not everyone who's intersex is trans. It's one of those things, different communities, different pieces there. Myself, I identify with both because there's born that way and then transition later in life after being raised predominantly male, right? Yes, on top of that, back to the gala now. I am a high school dropout, dropped out in the 10th grade, went on to later go back to college as an adult after moving to Houston. I recently graduated with a master's degree in social work as well as a 4.0 cumulative GPA, which is really cool. Something I like to brag about, but it's kind of weird. Um, I am also an alum of Lone Star Lend, which is Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental Disabilities through AUCD. So really cool programs for self-advocates as well as parents, professionals, anything like that. I am currently the vice president of the Texas Transgender Non-Discrimination Scholars, which is a grassroots community organizing group here in Texas. I also do a lot of organizing with the group called Texas Students for DEI, um, which basically we try to influence policy, try to go through and support other people, try to affect universities, DEI policy. Doing both in Texas is really not the best. Yes. So both of those are grassroots community volunteering stuff. But most importantly, I am also an ACI alum. Yeah, other than that, I grew up in Oklahoma, moved to Houston. Once I came here, I was really fortunate to run into, we have a really awesome queer community here and got mentored by some amazing people, got connected in. Um, yeah. So right now it's sort of focused on organizing the community, trying to push back against all of the anti-trans stuff that's happening. There's a lot of it on the university level. College Compact for Higher Education Excellence or something that is called is really terrifying. As well as just a lot of stuff going on at Texas Tech University. They recently became the first university in the United States to completely ban teaching about transgender, gender diverse, intersex people, anything like that. So yeah, a lot of work to be done.
Ren, go ahead. I'll circle back to you, and then we can go into the next question, the first question.
A little more about what I'm actually doing right now. I am part of a powerful little team at the disability-led civil rights nonprofit Communication First. We work to protect and advance the human and civil rights of anyone in the so-called United States who needs augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC, of any kind, for any reason. The phrase we use to describe our community is anyone who can't rely on speech alone to be heard and understood. Although autistic people make up a large percentage of the community we serve, we're a cross-disability organization, which means we serve people based on their support needs rather than diagnosis or identity. As a direct result, the coalition we've formed is incredibly resilient and incredibly creative. It's also uniquely accommodating. In an Able-East world, the limitations imposed by my serious chronic illnesses are a deal-breaker for most work, including in most grassroots settings. I am unimaginably lucky to have found a place that will not only let me do my dream job, but will let me be seriously ill while I do it. I am mostly bedbound and spend most of my time horizontal. My whole life is structured, or more accurately, unstructured, around surprise medical events. I never know when I'm going to be able to work or for how long. I frequently have to cancel or change expectations. I work strange hours. My communication often, quite frankly, sucks, because pain, fatigue, and inflammation of the brain are very good at getting in the way of executive function and language both. And I am keenly aware that the only reason I am able to work is that I got lucky, and stumbled across an amazing organization with amazing people in it, who have been willing to work with me as I fumble through the process of figuring out how to work in tandem with a community, when my body doesn't even quite know how to work in tandem with itself. Today I'm hoping to talk about how justice work can be possible from the sickbed, share tidbits I hope might help other sick people, and point out a few ways grassroots organizing could be doing better. Now I'm done.
Thank you. So our first question for the group will be, a lot of community building happens in small conversations after big group meetings. How have you grown those casual talks on the journey back home into lasting relationships? And for this question, Autumn, would you like to start?
Uh, Most certainly I can. I will say this one, that's often not been my experience. And I think a lot of it is the accessibility thing, right? I'm the kind of person I like when I'm at home by myself, do really well. It's just sensory stuff starts to get really overwhelming and I start to run into a lot of problems. And if I'm in a big group of people and there's a lot of conversations going on, as soon as that event's over, the first thing that I'm doing is leaving quickly by myself without talking to anybody. Cause like I can't, I just can't, right? So something that I've kind of learned to do whenever I'm in those organizing spaces is to recognize different people, recognize who's in that community, and sort of like what kind of attitudes might work with me, what kind of people there are based off the conversations or anything that happens there. I've really found a big experience of mine has been that taking sort of transactional approaches don't build those lasting relationships, right? Whenever it's you approach someone and be like, what can I do for you? What can you do for me? That's just not how that works. Kind of give a story of how I actually got involved with the Texas Transgender Non-Discrimination Scholars. Dr. Maria Gonzalez came to one of the classes I was in and started speaking about like the work that she's done there. And actually ended up, this was kind of the only time I've actually chased someone down after that. I just chased her down, talked to her, I was like, hey, I love to work with y'all and learn more about what you do. She ended up introducing me to one Josephine Titsworth. And Josephine, amazing human being. She was just amazing advocate in so many ways. She knew every trans person in Texas at one point in time, I swear. I have never gone anywhere. Like, if you've been in Texas for more than a decade, you would know Josephine. Um, and she taught me so many things, but networking and sort of making those connections was just one thing that I never really, that she couldn't teach me because, like, it was just one of those things that came very, very naturally to her. And it just did not come naturally to me, right? And there's just that huge disconnect. And over time, what I really started finding with that was there was so much of myself that I was scared to show up with in those spaces, and so much of myself that I was scared to sort of present to others. And it was just that constant guarding piece, right? It's almost that point where the term masking feels very reductionist because it's not like it's just a mask that you take on and off. It's multiple versions of yourself that you develop through different interactions and different relations with different people. And it was that point of trying to form a version of myself for this advocacy space. And that was really the part, like once I started making that connection and started breaking down those barriers and started being more open about who I was whenever I started to approach people and started to engage with people, is really when those relationships started to open up and I started to develop it a lot better. So that's sort of what I came to, is that point of using that advocacy space as a point of restoration for myself, where it's showing up with my full self and showing up with that person that I want to be and making those connections that way. And making connections can definitely be hard, but it's just that point of once you start showing up and being yourself and start accepting that you're not going to connect with everybody, you're not going to be able to work with everybody. So sort of reach out to people. It can be scary if you see somebody and it's like, hey, this person's going to know everybody in the room and you're not good at reaching out to people and you're not good at talking to people. Reach out to that person, right? Send them an email, look up their social media, whatever. And people who do organizing stuff, people reach out to us all the time. And it's sort of that point where it might feel very scary and very intimidating, especially if you're the kind of person who doesn't talk much or doesn't engage much. But it's really that opportunity to expand and be that version of yourself that you want to see be in that future that we're trying to create. Yeah, I think that was about it.
Thank you, Autumn. Ren, would you like to go next?
Like Autumn, this runs into accessibility issues for me. It's very rare that I can go to big group meetings. Even when I was less sick, I couldn't tolerate lots of people in the same space, and my instinct is not to talk to people unless they talk to me first, anyway. But the more sick I've gotten, the less energy I've had for any social interactions, let alone groups. It's also gotten harder to physically attend, and that's true even for totally remote meetings. You're still attending those meetings, still doing work, even if what you're doing is listening to a meeting while laying down in bed in the dark, covered in ice packs and heating pads and drugged to the gills. There are times for me when even that isn't possible. I have still managed to build lasting relationships, though. I've been trying to figure out how it is that I can reach out to someone that I haven't been able to talk to in over 5 years and ask them for something, when most of the time, sick people do not get that kind of grace. I think what I have done, really by accident, is cultivate a network that is built of people who see that we share not just goals and interests, but also an intensity of caring. Call it dedication, or devotion, or passion. It's the light that shines inside of a person when they are focused on something that they see as a priority. When I go to an event, when I meet new people in new settings, it's because being there was more important than anything else. So the sense that I have internally, that being here matters, comes across in the things I do and say, and people tell me this after they meet me for the first time. I don't feel intensely about most things. But I don't waste my time or energy on those things if I can help it. Everything I have goes to this narrow, focused band of things that I am willing to, at the end of the day, endure pain and suffering to engage with. To work on. To be part of. I don't have a lot of connections, but the ones I do have are strong, and they are strong because they are built on this shared love of a better world. I recognize this dedication in another person and they recognize it in me. So my advice to anyone who has limited energy to build these relationships is to follow the things that ignite you. Focus on what matters most to you and discard the rest as much as you can. Follow your love. Let that love be your strength. And the people who are going to really be your allies will notice, and they will remember you, even through the stretches of time when you can't talk to anyone at all. And really, I think this echoes everything Autumn said about unmasking being critical.
Thank you, Ren. AJ, would you like to take us out on this question?
Yeah, this is AJ speaking. I hadn't really thought about this for, however many years, however long. And then for one of the book clubs that I host, we read Let This Radicalize You by Kelly Hayes and Miriam Kaba. And in the book, they talk about this ride home type of thing. And I thought, I don't, I don't really have that. But then I kept thinking, and I often do that in organizing spaces after the meeting rather than after the action. So when I've done organizing or even done advocacy work, there's lots of calls, lots of meetings, but during those you can have side chats, or if they're digital, like a DM or something like that. And you can connect that way and then develop the conversation. And so for me, I think going off what both Ren and Autumn said is finding the best way to connect and communicate with people who you share a vision or a dream with. And it's not necessarily the physical ride home or the physical in-person actions where you can meet people who are on the same page, or share the same dreams and goals. You can do that in virtual spaces and virtual meetings. And it's not necessarily physically on the ride home. Like maybe it's the text message or the signal message on the ride home. Maybe it's like, this person seems interesting, maybe I would want to spend time with them, not necessarily planning an action or organizing, but getting to know them as a person. And I think that's just as important in terms of building community, as building those strong bonds and understanding people's strengths and weaknesses and their fears and the things that they love, and building community that way. So I would say it's not necessarily always directly tied to doing and organizing action, but there are multiple ways to find your community and build your community, and you know non action spaces, I guess.
Thank you, AJ. And so our next question is, how do we continue to fund and resource our community movements while federal funding is up in the air for so many? And I'm cheating everybody. I'm writing down like orders of counting time on the notes card. AJ, would you mind getting to go first for this one, even though you just went last?
Yeah, that's totally cool with me. This is AJ again. I think, Alex, can you ask the question again?
Totally can.
I'm s-
How do
I'm sorry, I was totally distracted by the really good question in the chat. So uh in the Q&A, whatever. But Alex, can you ask your question again one more time?
Yes, absolutely can. And completely understandable. Hopefully, that's why I'm trying to keep time so we can get to our Q&A. Um, how do we continue to fund and resource our community
Yeah. Oh
movements
yeah.
while federal funding is up in the air for so many?
Yeah, so this is a huge problem with the nonprofit industrial complex, because a lot of nonprofits do have federal funding or funding from donors with political ties that expect certain things. And to combat that, we need to better understand what mutual aid is. It's not just charity or giving money. True mutual aid is an act of solidarity and care that goes beyond just the financial means, but that is important, providing financial stability or security or help for those in need. But also understanding that if you don't have the financial means, offering your time and volunteering, your presence can be just as valuable. Offering rides to folks who need it so they don't have to pay for transportation, um, or finding accessible transit for folks who need it, is really helpful. Delivering groceries or medication, I think better better education and understanding about the depths of what mutual aid and community care require is incredibly important. I think a lot of that education is starting to happen a bit more, but it's a huge issue because for so long we've been reliant upon nonprofits that have alleged to speak for communities, that have alleged to support and protect communities. And what you're seeing now especially under the current administration. I think this is a C3 thing, so I don't want to get y'all in trouble. I guess you gave us cover by saying it's not ASAN's views, but under the current Trump administration, like a lot of nonprofits are scared. A lot of nonprofits are losing funding. A lot of nonprofits have had to let people go because they've lost federal funding. A lot of nonprofits, because of the genocide that's going on in Gaza, have people in their leadership who are afraid to speak up. And so you're seeing that traditional leaders who were alleged to be progressive or forward thinking or radical actually aren't that. And they're institutions. That's what nonprofits are. And they've become institutionalized and cowardly. And so what you're seeing is people going outside those institutions and traditional structures to care for their communities and care for causes that really matter to them. So when you see big progressive, disabled, whatever nonprofit being scared to speak up for students on campuses that are silenced for Gaza, what you're seeing is communities come together and donate to bail funds and donate to have free speech defense lawyers and things like that. So I think understanding the true depths of community solidarity is super important in combating the lack of funding as we live in a capitalist hellscape and try to survive that.
Thank you, AJ, and thank you for the reminder that the views of panelists today are not the views of ASAN, though we very much appreciate your time, energy, and insight as activists. Autumn, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. Yes. And to go off of this, these are my personal views, not the views of ASAN. Right. So this is one that I struggle with because it's social work student, go and I just graduated, right? And it's the point of like looking for a job in this current reality of nonprofits and in that point of what that care and service industry looks like. And it really is so much of the nonprofit industrial complex. And what we mean by that is these sort of corporatized nonprofits that spend so much money on fundraising and so much money on developing themselves versus actually trying to support those communities. And it's designed from the ground up to provide just enough services to pacify people, to provide people with that understanding of, hey, what we're doing is enough that you're able to survive, but it's not enough to let you make real change. It's not enough it's just enough to keep the system going. And whenever we look at the 2024 election, one of the big realities of that to me was it wasn't a question of one political party or the other. It was a question of one form of economic dominance or the other, right? This idea of do we want corporations or do we want oligarchs? And both of them have their own point where there's that push to justice, and that's marketed towards people and it's marketed towards different groups. And the reality of it is, right now, if we look at it, that oligarchy is the one that won, right? And the unfortunate piece is with corporations, stabilization is better because it allows that progress, that economic piece to keep going. And you have to look no further than like what AJ was mentioning with Gaza, Sudan, and all the genocides that are happening, and all of these points where there's this argument for justice, but these nonprofits that are built within that corporate mentality and that neoliberal vision of the future do not push back on that because it impacts funding, it impacts that industrial complex piece to it. And right now, what we're seeing is that oligarchy is one, and the intent with that is to privatize. The intent is to move away from any sort of stability in terms of support for people who are marginalized, support for people who are being oppressed and attacked, and instead focusing on consolidating power and working towards tyranny as far as like how we're allowed to exist in this world. So whenever we have that system built on that sort of elite capture where it's the people in power who are able to dictate what gets funded, who gets supported, and what type of work is done. It's those people in power that are able to control that. And it's just that reality right now where the future that we're looking at is we can't really force back into that system that might have been a little bit more comfortable. So the future is either this point of accepting that tyranny or going through a sort of revolution in a way where, and when I say that, the first thing that comes to a lot of people's mind is usually some sort of violence, and it doesn't have to be that at all, and it shouldn't be. It's that iterative change, that cultural change that happens from the ground up within each individual person, where we're going through and deconstructing that nonprofit industrial complex, going through and deconstructing those neoliberal and sort of patriarchal approaches we have to community organizing, and approaching that materialistic and individualistic mentalities that are so built into the imperialist and colonialist ideologies that we've been fed our entire lives. And all that to say, what we're facing right now with this issue of community funding, if we go back to that same piece of federal funding and we're able to sort of approach back to that, that just puts us back in the same system where the only solution is often to end up back here and again in the future. So what we're seeing right now and how we can approach that right now is with these prefigurative approaches, which what that means is organize as close to what you want the world to be and that shared vision and build those relational connections from there, right? It is that mutual aid. If you have neighbors who don't have food, invite them over for dinner, feed them. If you have a skill, if you have something that you can do, start living those values now. Start working as close to that as you can, because we have to move away from that nonprofit industrial complex at the end of the day. Because trying to go back to that point where it's the elite choosing who gets funded for what, it's never going to end up any other way than what we're at right now.
Thank you, Autumn. Ren, would you like to go?
This is definitely one of those areas where I am not an example to follow, and I think the reason why is pretty common among justice workers. My instinct is always to just do the unpaid work no matter what, because I learned from my mother, who has many of the same chronic illnesses I do, but she was undiagnosed and untreated. Yet her approach was always, well, the work has to get done, and if nobody else is doing it, I'll do it myself. She was always the volunteer, always the one getting up when she was sick just so the dishes wouldn't still be in the sink. And I am always fighting that learned instinct, even if only because I know it has made my mother so much sicker than she would otherwise be. And that's not going to help me do the work. But my first encounter with grassroots work was also completely volunteer work, usually upwards of 30 hours a week, while I was in high school. It was completely unpaid, and very much informal. It was a bunch of teenagers getting together to do the work we saw a need for. I don't think the idea of being paid ever crossed any of our minds. And I know that everyone I worked with then has moved on to either grassroots work or the social services sector, and I'm sure that we all still have this mindset of, well, someone has to do the work, might as well be me, which wasn't really sustainable then and sure isn't sustainable now. I remember at the time someone interviewed me for a book they were writing on grassroots organizations, and they asked me how I kept going, how I continued to do the work even though it could be so painful, how I took care of myself. And, it's true, I was working with suicidal teenagers, youth who were getting kicked out of their homes, people who were describing hate crimes and abuse. I said to the interviewer, well, the work itself energizes me. I run on the work. I don't need to rest. If I just keep helping people, I can go like this indefinitely. I look back on that mindset now in abject horror. I don't think anyone I know would let me so much as think about working like that now, and thank goodness, because it would kill me. My boss has been really helpful for this, as I relearn the idea that we can't run on empty. She is fierce about making sure that everyone is getting compensated fairly, is being taken care of. But she's also incredibly creative and proactive in finding new sources of funding, especially private grantmakers, and I think she benefits a lot from what I mentioned earlier, just radiating an intensity of dedication to this work. So when funders are thinking about new projects, they'll often come to her, instead of the other way around. Every so often we'll come to a decision that we're not going to take on any new projects for a bit while we catch up, and then she'll come to the team meeting and say, "So, you'll never guess who approached me with this really compelling idea," which I love. I thrive in a culture that values project hopping. And I do feel that diversifying our sources has also made us more financially resilient. I am not good at talking about money, which is also very much a learned behavior. So I'm working on getting more comfortable with that for myself, because as much as it is my instinct, I don't have the luxury of volunteering all my time, especially as someone who is living in ableism and forced poverty.
Thank you. I think y'all gave a very well-rounded perspective on both community, pivoting towards community mutual aid and making sure that as workers doing work on the ground, we are still making sure our needs are getting met as opposed to just sanding ourselves down to the nubbins. For our next question, we have, what do communities need in order to grow strong and last? And Autumn, would you like to go first?
I most absolutely can. So yeah, this one is one for me. My initial instinct is to try to look towards the structures and try to think, how do we form this? How do we build this? And whenever I think of community, though, there's something more to it, right? And the word that comes up is metaphysical, which is sort of this piece that isn't tangible. It's not something that we can touch. It's that relationality, that point where we are connecting as a community. And it's just that point of reality. There aren't words for everything. And sometimes that thing is just a feeling, it's just this point that's not really empirical, it's not quantitative, it's just something that you can't define. And building off of that and that sort of soul, that nature, that meaning, that extra quality is what really makes a community, right? And a lot of the times it's letting go of trying to put everything on paper and trying to have everything so organized and being able to communicate it. Instead, just taking this organic approach to community building, where it is those stories that we develop together, those experiences that we develop together, those connections and that shared chaos that sort of builds that authentic group culture is a piece that you have to embrace anytime you're working in community, right? Because if it's just this idea of we are this, we do this, it's taking that humanity and that soul out of it, right? So it's understanding that emotion and that will to engage and that sort of that feeling in that soul and recognizing that as part of the community power that's happening there, right? It's that connection to the world, those connections to each other, continuation of the past and working towards the belonging of the future, right? It's really that point where there's so many ways to approach that, but the biggest part of it is bringing yourself into those spaces and recognizing people for who they are and accepting and engaging with that. And that's something I've seen in a lot of, nonprofit spaces where it is this approach towards let's do organizing where you do this. This is your role. You are the person who does this. You don't do anything else. And at some point, like, well, what if I'm actually over here right now and we're kind of working together? Whenever we start trying to have that level of control that's not humanistic, it starts to erode that piece of that soul of organizing of that community. And for communities to be able to build and grow and last, it really is having that extra piece that is developed through those relationships and through that shared existence and that love and joy with amongst ourselves, right? And that's really something that can be hard whenever we're trying to focus so much on metrics and so much on quantifying things. Yeah, that was one. There's a lot of answers to it, but I feel like that one is one that just touched it right for me. So thank you.
Thank you, Autumn. Ren, would you like to go next?
This is such a huge and complicated question that I'm not sure which direction to take it, so I'm just going to relinquish myself to a stream of consciousness here. We're always circling back to this phrase at communication first. Heard and understood. To me, that's the center of what I mean by reciprocity. Not just listened to, but processed. Thought through. Here's an example. I had to cancel a meeting because I was just too sick to communicate with another human being, and I thank the coworker for making me feel comfortable doing that. Anyone who has ever had to cancel a meeting because of their health knows that it comes with shame and with stigma. An anti-ableist culture can make it easier, but it's always frustrating and disappointing to change expectations at the last minute. My coworker said to me that I made them feel the same way, that next time they were too sick to make it, they knew I would understand. That's CRIP solidarity, but it's also just being heard and understood. Of course, I don't want to cancel on you. But of course, I deserve to be met with understanding when I do. And of course, I would extend the same grace to you. We, as humans, do have a tendency to only do half of this process. It's much easier, and admittedly it's often also safer, to hear someone than to understand them. Hearing, and I mean this metaphorically, in the sense of receiving information, only takes patience and attention. But understanding takes time and focus and, I think, compassion. I am a firm believer that empathy, the ability to feel what other people are feeling, is not necessary for this kind of understanding, but compassion is. And compassion is the belief that other people are doing their best with what is currently available to them. You can't build a resilient community without that belief. Because people are always going to disappoint you, but the key to outlasting disappointment and frustration is believing that they did their best, and that they can do better when they are provided with more resources and better circumstances, and that doing better is an evolving and communal process. Hearing and understanding is also part of conflict resolution, and thoughtful, transformative conflict resolution is absolutely essential to keeping a community from shattering. Like my autistic approach to communication, very straightforward, might be received in a way that makes sense for someone who is used to reading possible subtext more loudly than text. That is hearing without understanding. But the willingness to extend understanding, on both sides, why did you say that and why did you receive it that way, can improve that communication. The problem with all of this is that it's a very idealist approach. There are absolutely people who are not doing their best on purpose. But I have found that if I treat people like I believe they were doing their best, they will try to do their best. Trauma theory and best practices of trauma responsive care back up this approach. So many conflicts spin out of not taking a moment to think about why someone might behave that way, or respond like that, or even just not taking a moment to ask. This is also part of understanding beyond hearing. And then, perhaps most critically, the more I understand about the possible lives other people live, the easier it is for me to not just hear, but understand. I've used my understanding of my own positionality to inform my knowledge of what I don't know. Like, as a white settler in the Imperial Corps, which voices have I been least likely to not just hear, but to understand? I start there. This is also part of the understanding that strengthens communities. All of this is a rather meandering way of saying that to be strong and lasting, communities need the 10 principles of disability justice. This is a short document written by the Disability Justice Collective Sins Invalid. If you haven't read it, please do. It is transformative.
Thank you, Ren. Always love when we're building. I like that we're building a reading list for everyone today. AJ, would you like to close us out on this question?
Yeah, this is AJ. I think Ren and Autumn made some really good points. For me, I don't I don't think communities have to last. I think Ren mentioned resilience, which I think is important. But I guess for me, as someone who works a lot in communities that come and go and are maybe transient, the most important thing is for community members to have the tools to meet the needs of other community members. I think mentioning the principles of disability justice as outlined by Sons Invalid is a great place to start. One of those principles is recognizing the wholeness of humans, and I think that's recognizing our needs and our flaws and our wants and our dreams, and giving people the ability and the skills to have empathy, to recognize when some people don't have capacity, and we have to cycle through who is giving and who is receiving and who is taking and who is borrowing. I think those skills and that knowledge, oh, I'm so sorry that the sun is doing sun things to me. Um, those skills and that knowledge are I think really important to give people the ability to build their own communities, to put down roots in communities, but also to understand that sometimes communities change and we have to navigate those changes.
Sorry, everyone. It's been a long day and I almost turned off my video instead of unmuting myself. Um, Thank you, AJ. And our next question, also thank you because it's important to notice that like everything changes. And part of that is the fact that community can have life cycles and evolutions instead of feeling like it's a failure if community changes or sort of transitions into a different life form. Um, so our next question is, what are less talked about roles in community organizing that you feel are important to the work? And Ren, would you like to go first?
Disability justice leaders have been talking about it for a while, but I think when Leah Lakshmi Peepsna Samarasina published their book Care Work, the idea of care work, what it looks like, and what factors surround it, all these things started being taken more seriously in the mainstream. Funny how we've always been doing this theorizing for free on our blogs and in our work, but it doesn't become quote unquote real in a lot of places until it's in a published book. Anyway, care work is the behind the scenes work that involves taking care of other people and making sure things go smoothly. Peepsna Samarasina calls it a place where disability justice and queer femme emotional labor intersect. And they talk about all kinds of different examples of this. Like picking someone up from a bus stop in your car because they were in too much pain to handle the bus, or sitting with someone in the dark through a migraine, or talking through conflicts, or listening to someone talk about their abuse experiences, or doing all the organizational work in the background. This used to be my role, very straightforwardly, especially listening to people and solving disputes. And then I got sicker. Care work used to be the only work I could do, and then I stopped being able to do that. What does a career capital L listener do when they become allergic to stress? I mean that literally. If I get too stressed out, if I feel too many feelings too hard, I have epinephrine on my over bed table ready to go. And just interacting with people can sometimes be too much stress, depending on the circumstances. I have had anaphylaxis before because a social interaction went unexpectedly poorly. This, as you can imagine, really gets in the way of getting things done. Under these circumstances, I had to relearn so much about my role in the community, my strengths and weaknesses, my limits, how to describe and maintain my boundaries. And I think that the role I've taken on, the role that I think isn't talked about enough, is an interpretive one. I cannot protest with you, but I will help folks debrief when they get home, and we'll do a postmortem, figure out what to do differently next time. I cannot work directly on this report about police brutality, but I have so many resources saved about alternatives to policing. I cannot do the social footwork for this advisory panel, but I'll edit this piece to make it flow better before we send it out. I can't go to the appointment with you, but let's look at your blood test results together. Pretty much all I can do nowadays is lay down in bed and look at a screen. Sometimes I can't even look at the screen, but I can usually listen to someone read whatever's on the screen. But that still leaves so many possibilities. It's research, taking notes, resolving comments, writing summaries, smoothing things out and tweaking them to make them better and cleaner. It's maintaining a very big library because I literally have nothing better to do. It's knowing keyboard shortcuts. It's checking accessibility. It's being a critic, being another pair of eyes. This is work that is very solitary, and doesn't necessarily need to happen at certain times, and that's why it suits me. But that also means it's very much background noise, and to my knowledge there's not really a word for it. But someone does need to write down how the speakers pronounce their names before the webinar. Someone needs to make sure screen readers can read everything on the final draft. Someone needs to fix the citations. And that someone can do all of those things laying down in bed in the dark.
Thank you, Ren. I call that ferret in the tubes work. And that is my personal realm as well in a lot of ways. AJ, would you like to answer next?
Yeah, this is AJ. I think Ren bringing up care work and Leah's work is really important. Something as someone who's been doing this for a little bit that really pisses me off is you'll see a lot of people talk about wanting revolution and being revolutionaries and like overthrowing systems of capital and overthrowing governments and kind of all that shit. But people don't do the revolutionary work of making sure their communities are fed and cared for and loved. To me, I think that is the backbone of resistance and resilience and whatever word you want to use is making sure people survive. Right now, as fascism is all around us, survival is a type of resistance. It is a revolution to not let these evil pieces of shit kill you. I think that far too often people want like to be martyrs or to be remembered as the greatest revolutionary who ever lived, but every revolution that you look to history to be inspired by has unnamed people who were feeding, clothing people, making sure they had shelter, making sure that the leaders and the people who got all the plaudits and media were supported, doing logistical work, making sure people had a place to meet, making sure people had transportation to the meetings and the actions. I think it's all the small details that people don't view as revolutionary that are super important. It is so revolutionary to be empathetic and give a fuck about other people in a time of fascism and capitalist hell and genocide and slaughter. Like that is to me, that is truly revolutionary, is to push back against that every day with all of our actions and to do the very small things to show other people that we care about them and we give a fuck about their humanity. So that's my answer to that.
Thank you very much, AJ. I share your frustrations that many folks seem to want to be disability Rambo, but don't want to be a Care Bear. And we really need Care Bears. Um, Autumn, would you like to close us out on this question?
Oh, disability Rambo is my new favorite term. Okay. So yes, as far as less talked about community organizing roles, right? That's when there's so many, we all wear so many hats in doing community organizing, especially grassroots community organizing, where there's so many pieces to it. One that I always have such a love and passion for, though, that doesn't get the credit it often deserves, is the people who bring joy into that community, right? The people who bring that chaos and that fun and the art, right? That culture that comes from it, right? Something that's happening here in Houston. It's like they're taking away our rainbows, but like we just make more, right? And it's one of those, even like my friend Nora goes and photographs a whole bunch of stuff. And like actually, yes, it's that point where it's that connection to the work and that shared culture and that shared experience between it all. Because at the end of the day, we try to operationalize things and try to approach it as logically as we can and try to think what's the best we can do? How do we make this work? But what we're doing, in a lot of ways, it isn't logical, right? The fight we're taking on and trying to change things for it's not something we're going to be able to see come to fruition in our lifetimes. It's something people have worked for generations, and it's something that generations will continue to work for. But it's that piece where we're able to hold on to that hope. And it's one of those, my practicum supervisor gave me a quote that like I absolutely love. It's hope is a, I'm not going to say the word, but hope is effort, right? It's hard to have hope right now. It's hard to be that person that shows up in that community space and has a vision of the future and a recognition of where we are, because there's so much destruction that's happening. And it's something, queer person in Texas, right? We see it constantly where people who are here start to lose that hope and start to sort of fall out and say, hey, I have to get out of here. And I always understand that. It's not something I would ever question about somebody needing to leave, because like I get it. But staying here and continuing to do that work holds that piece of hope, continuing to show up as a queer person, as a disabled person in a space that isn't always supportive. It has that chaos, it has that connection, it has that extra piece that helps continue on that community, right? And add to the reading list for today, A Litany of Survival by Audre Lorde. It's an amazing poem, but basically it's talking about how marginalized communities have so often been imprinted with fear of speaking out our entire lives, and this fear that's taught to us by our parents, and how we see trying to navigate and survive in oppressive situations is often maintained through silence. But it comes to that point of we were never meant to survive, right? If we're living our lives in fear and we have no joy and we have only concern and hate and anger, are we really living, right? And it's that point, the actions we're taking today and the way that we live and the way that we organize and work together might not come to fruition, but that's a ripple that goes forward to the next generation. It's a ripple that I've experienced so many times in my life from people who have come before me. And it's something that hope that it can continue to be passed down to create that culture and community. And that work, that hat that some people wear in terms of that creation and that passion for the work and that passion for each other, that's something that doesn't get talked about much. We're taught so often, we try to name it and we try to ascribe it to an individual. And we say, oh, this person's a leader, oh, that person's in charge, or things like that. Sorry, I have a kitten who has decided to make an appearance. But yes, it's that point where we have to just accept that we all can carry part of that and that we can all be part of that role. And it's just to share that hope and inspiration with each other and to share that as a community through whatever medium works for you, be that art, be that poetry, be that just showing up and being your queer self, being your disabled self, stating what you need, being very direct about it, right? And it's showing that hope for a better future.
Thank you, Autumn. And you actually managed to bridge back to our first panel, and one of our panelists, Candace McCrae, talked about she is from the Haudenosaunee Nation, the Iroquois, and talked about the principle of 7 generations. And that both is the thing of looking back and like what did 7 generations behind her have to do for her to be here? And then looking forward of what right now, thinking about what she's doing right now, how that will that impact 7 generations in the future. And I think that's one of the really important things of movement that is about hope, is recognizing we're not going to wake up tomorrow and everything's, you know, peaches and cream and sunshine and rainbows, but we can move it forward. And our last question of the planned questions before we get to open to Q&A is, how have you seen, or how has your own community building changed since the beginning since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and as we continue to go into, time is frightening, year 5 of the COVID-19 pandemic? Like, how have you seen those changes, and what changes would you like to see? And AJ, would you like to start us off?
This is AJ. I think one of the things that I've had to be better at is understanding that my tent for advocacy and coalition has to be broader, and I have to be more understanding of differences within that coalition. I think my community can still be tight knit and close, and we can have shared views about a lot more things and shared values about a lot more things. But to actually coalition build, it takes an amount of flexibility and understanding that I have had to improve on. There are lots of people who I don't like that I need to be in political coalitions with in order to make the changes that I want. That doesn't mean that I have to be in community with them necessarily, but over the past couple of years, because COVID in many ways has exposed a lot of the cracks in society, and a lot more people are falling through those cracks and don't have safety nets. There are people coming in with different levels of political education, of movement education, of institutional education and knowledge. And I've had to work on being more accepting of understanding of meeting those folks where they are and finding our commonalities in order to be in coalition. And that's something I'm still working on, is not compromising my values while at the same time making sure that I am doing the best to build as broad of a coalition as possible to get the results for the people that I care about.
Thank you, AJ. You've also bridged back to our first panel, because the discussion of having to work with folks you don't necessarily like or always agree with, and that unfortunately being a very important part of the work, also came up. Autumn, would you like to answer next?
Yes, I most definitely can. So this is one going into COVID was, I grew up in Oklahoma, rural Oklahoma. Queer kid came out as 12. If you live in, it was a mistake, right? Yes. And largely the way that I was able to connect to community was online, right? It was that piece of meeting people, not in person, but more forums, things like that. Literally, my first connection with the autistic community was Wrong Planet. I'm old. And it's like, yes. And then finally moving to Houston and having that point where there is community here was such a huge change. I moved here in 2015, 2016. And it's just that point where there were other queer people, there are other trans people, there are other openly autistic people. There's that point where I'm able to meet others and connect and really develop those shared connections in person in a way that I never had before. Right. And then come 2016 was about when they started doing all the anti-trans stuff, and then COVID happened. And it's at this point now, the local community has been so decimated by politics and by this sort of polarization that it feels like it's largely going back to connecting online. And that increased accessibility is great. It's safe, it's better in so many ways, but it feels like a lot of the advocacy, the community building, it's very polarized. It's very all or nothing thinking in the way that things get approached. And that's just something that wasn't the same before, right? Where it's just kind of playing towards an algorithm almost, where the most extreme opinion gets amplified the most. And it's that pushback where it's just hard to make those connections because there's often so much hate and so much anger and so much polarization that's so normalized with it. This idea of you're with us or you're against us. And progressive organizing is a unique beast in this because like it tries to play towards making profound changes, but there's so much of that culture that stays there that interrupts it so constantly. Where if we're not able to take a more pluralistic approach, then we're not going to be able to move forward together. We have to kind of recognize and have those relationships and have those conversations both amongst ourselves and across different groups, right? Something that has really been coming up a lot is whenever we're looking at these organizing spaces now, it's highly identity based, where it's if you're part of this identity, you belong here, but don't care about other things. And like for myself doing DEI work in Texas, it's that point, there's so many different groups under attack. And if I was only trying to show up for the queer community, only trying to show up for the disability community, that feels inauthentic to the world, the vision that I want to see. And that's really one of the big changes that I think needs to happen. We try to organize within individual identity-based communities, but I'm a white person, right? I grew up in a white supremacist society, and white people are so heavily viewed a certain way where if I go and call another white person racist, that holds a lot more power than having other marginalized people say the same thing and trying to put that work on them. So it's taking that work and going and empowering instead of trying to lead, because so much of that, whenever we go into our own community pieces, is trying to lead. Oh, I'm trying to be in the queer community. I want to lead as that queer community. But whenever we go into those other communities and take that empowerment approach, it's using your own privilege and recognizing that even if you are somebody who's experienced certain levels of oppression, you also have certain levels of privilege, and using that to work to build that better future and to empower people, not to take that piece of control, but to take that piece of empowerment and support and saying, how can I show up? How can I work with you? And yeah, I think that's really the biggest thing whenever we talk about progressive organizing. That piece that gets stuck on so much is that people aren't willing to let go of that hierarchy. They're not willing to let go of that control. And if that's the vision of the future that we want, where it is equality, where we do have that equity, we have to let go of that and let go of some of those privileges and use that to support others. And that's really a change that I think needs to happen because things have gotten so much more polarized and so much has moved online. And it's just that echo chamber and algorithms playing to themselves.
Thank you, Autumn. Thank you for highlighting, I think, the ways in which that sort of intensifying of black and white thought in online spaces actually kind of perpetuates the same hierarchies that we're trying to break down, by trying to hold on to power, by being ranking this thing of like, are you a good activist or are you a bad activist? And doesn't move us. Ren, would you like to close us out before we open up to Q&A?
I had really high hopes at the beginning of the pandemic, because for the first time people were routinely including me in ways that were actually possible for me. I could type to communicate during gatherings. I didn't have to steel myself to leave my house and come home and deal with the fallout. I could attend an event even if I wasn't able to sit up. People recorded things, people used new formats, people wore pajamas to video calls. It was amazing. Finally, everyone else was on my level. I was thriving for the first time in my life. I heard other people talk about how difficult quarantine was, but from my perspective, I was doing exactly what I always did, only now other people were here with me. And then fast forward to now and that has all collapsed. Not completely, of course, because everyone still knows how to use Zoom, which means I can work. But even at times when I'm prepared to expend the effort to be there in person, people don't mask. This is a microcosm of the real problem, the abandonment of the people who cannot leave home. Even in community-oriented settings, in grassroots settings, settings that claim to care about self-advocates and disabled people, I have to ask, will people be masking? And most of the time people will just say, no. I'm immunocompromised, with a volatile immune condition. If I get COVID, I will die or become more disabled, that is just the truth. This is to say nothing of the people I rely on and who rely on me. My wife already has long COVID. So I don't feel like I'm asking for much, in the face of those risks. I offer to provide the N95s myself. I offer to help with the process of improving air quality. And of course I know people who can't wear masks because they use ventilators or because their bodies won't cooperate. But the people who refuse, if they answer me at all, cite general discomfort. I am also uncomfortable. I am uncomfortable that I am so often the only one who seems to be ready to take on physical discomfort to get things done. I am always thinking, is this community care? Is this what it means to respect each other? But I don't have the time or energy to fight. So I stay home, and I work on other things, and this alienates me enormously from physical community and the conversations that happen there. I hear this same sentiment from other chronically ill justice workers, especially those who newly have long COVID. And it just doesn't have to be this way. So here is what I want. I want remote access to everything, including events that are otherwise fully in person, and I don't want to have to ask. I want everyone to designate what communication first calls an access monitor, just someone keeping an eye on the chat who will bring the meeting to a pause so they can read aloud what I had to say. Someone who will make sure I'm really a part of the conversation, not just an afterthought. I want asynchronous options like forums that actually get used, that are valued. I want people to be able to work at any hour, any day of the week. I want people reaching out to housebound people online, on chronic illness forums, through remote work recruiters. I want people to have real conversations with me about what I need to be able to fully participate and meaningfully contribute. I want people to not cringe away when I talk about my life or my illness. I want everyone to normalize being comfortable while they work, laying down, wearing pajamas, listening to music. I want the people who are stuck at home to be just as valued as every person who can be there in the flesh. We have just as much to say. In terms of practical COVID response, I want people wearing N95 masks. I want people to care about ventilation and air quality. I want people to not attend the meeting in person if they feel sick, or if they had an exposure. I want people to take preventable illnesses seriously. Because a preventable illness that might be annoying to you is debilitating and potentially deadly for me. Even just your common cold as my pneumonia, is my punctured lung. People like me are not rare. The world just doesn't see us, because we are in our homes trying desperately not to die or get sicker. There are hundreds of thousands of us, and as long COVID and associated conditions become more prevalent, our numbers will only grow, especially in the autistic community, where mast cell activation and autoimmune diseases are much more likely. What I want is for people who espouse community care to care about their whole community. We are here. We want to work with you. Those of you who have the energy need to use it. Make it possible for those of us who have nothing to spare to be part of the conversation.
Thank you, Ren, and I really appreciate like the actionable items that you added into your answer because it's been very disheartening to see instead of recalibrating to our current environment, this push for a return to a normal that no longer exists, that is part of our history and not part of our present and won't be part of our future. Uh, we all deserve to be part of the community, and we know that that's possible now. Now we can open the floor for Q&A. So we're going to circle back to that initial question we got at Jump. And someone has asked, what are your thoughts on the importance of and strategizing for building community power across movements, like the labor movement, disability rights movement, the anti-fascist movement, etc.? AJ, I know you were excited for this question. Would you like to go first in answering it?
Yeah, this is AJ. I don't know if I was excited about it. It's a really difficult answer, and a lot of people have different theories about how you do that, how you have cross movement solidarity, right? That's a principle of disability justice. Um, but then you have folks that are like, we should focus on class and have class solidarity because that is the way to get across all these movements. But oftentimes you'll see folks in the labor movement really exclude disabled people. And it's like, where's the class solidarity and that with disabled people likely to be extremely poor living in poverty? So I don't know. That's a really difficult question to answer, which is partially why I was distracted by it, because I think if someone does have a good answer for that, a lot of people could use that and could use the help in order to have that cross movement solidarity. But I do think it's very important.
Oh, this is one I've struggled with for a long time, and I've actually studied on it, done some theorizing on this piece. We have in our culture so often, and just like that, not just even American culture, but sort of that current zeitgeist, that current feel of the moment where it feels like we're put in a position where we have to take moving this sort of coalescence into one, where it has to become that sort of melting pot idea, right? And that's just not the reality of it. We don't have to deconstruct our own identities. We need to deconstruct the system that requires us to not have those identities. And it's taking that more pluralistic approach, right? Where if we look at it from, if we have a circle and somebody's sitting at the margin in that circle, if we're supporting that person and taking whatever issues they're having and working together to work towards that center in terms of privilege, if somebody is experiencing so many levels of interlocking oppression, if we go through and start to deconstruct that level of oppression that's causing them to experience those problems, then we can start moving towards that benefiting society, humanity as a whole, because we so often have this idea of any work I do needs to be transactional. It needs to benefit me. It needs to benefit somebody that I care about versus benefiting the whole, benefiting humanity, benefiting our entire community, right? And not just that identity-based community, not just disability rights or labor or anti-fascism, but humanity as a whole. And that piece can be very, very difficult because it is taking that point where you're sitting down and talking to people and accepting views and different realities that might not automatically meet with your own, but building into that mosaic piece and that community as a whole and working towards that better future together is really that point where each tries to take that lead, and there can't be a single leader, right? It can't be that single piece. It has to be deconstructing the source of that oppression, both within the communities that we live in, right? Queer community is super racist all the time. Disability community is super racist all the time. And there's those points where if we're not looking at ourselves and trying to deconstruct that, but we're saying, no, no, we need to include, but if we're including without equity, then we're not really working together as much as trying to use those other identities to further our own gains. And that materialistic approach, that transactional approach that so often comes into these organizing pieces, is something that needs to be deconstructed and let go of, because if that's not something that we want in the future, we have to start working towards letting go of it now. And we have to recognize the harm that disability community has caused to people who are multiply marginalized, the harm that the queer community has caused to people who are multiply marginalized, because that's just the reality of it. Yeah. So I think that's a really big piece to it, is taking that more mosaic approach where those multiple ideals, those multiple lived realities, those multiple experiences are able to exist together, rather than that expectation that they're all supposed to melt together into one uniform piece.
Thank you, Autumn. Ren, would you like to, are you good to answer? And that will close us out, and then I'll give the final curtain for tonight.
Exactly what Autumn is saying. I don't think I have ever been strategizing with specific movements to begin with. It has always been strategizing with people, and letting each person's connections build a broader web organically and gradually.
Thank you. And thank you all for tackling. Hey, thank you, whoever anonymous human in the audience who asked that question, because it is indeed, I think, one of the biggest ones that I think we all kind of continuously circle back to, because we will not, I believe we don't get forward unless we figure out how to do cross movement work. But at the same time, there is, as AJ said, no one answer for us to get there. So thank you for bringing that into this room tonight, this virtual room tonight. And thank everyone. Thank you so much to everybody on the panel tonight for your time and your expertise. And as we close out, I want to let folks know that ASAN will be sharing a video of this panel. It'll be available on our YouTube channel over the next couple days. And also, the ASAN Gala would not be possible without all of those in the audience and those who have sponsored with us this evening. If you would like to support ASAN in our mission, please consider becoming a member. Ongoing support from the community is what allows us to continue doing this work, and it would not be possible without the support from y'all. Thank you so much. And thank you again to AJ, Autumn, and Ren, and to everybody who's come and been part of this conversation tonight. We really appreciate this time with the community that we've gotten, and that we hope that you'll join us a little bit later on YouTube for our pre-recorded awards ceremony. That is the end of our panel this evening. We slid in nicely at 5 minutes to closing time. Thank you again. Really have been appreciated this conversation.